helping people cope with and overcome life's challenges. This is Life Transformations with Michael Hart, Certified Christian Counselor and Director of Ottawa's Elam Counselling Services.
Hi, I'm Michael Hart, Director of Elam Counselling Services, a Christian counseling ministry in Ottawa, and I want to thank you for listening to this edition of Life Transformation, a Christian counseling radio show where chains are broken and lives are renewed. Elam Counselling Services is a professional counseling service that approach mental health and couples-related issues from a biblical perspective. Some of you have asked a question about insurance claims and whether or not our services are recognized by insurance companies. The answer is yes. Most major insurers recognize the services that we perform at Elam. And I'm a certified Canadian counselor and psychotherapist with the Canadian Counseling and Psychotherapy Association. If you're not familiar with Elam Counseling Services, you can find out more about us at www.elamcounselingministry.com. You can also call us with questions at 613-699-1677. Again, it's 613-699-1677. And again, with the website, it's elamcounselingministry.com. Counseling is spelled with 2 L's. And as usual, we have another interesting show lined up for you today. The show today is on the topic sexual abuse. And with me in studio today is Rick Lecuyer. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you, Michael. Good to be here again.
It is so great to have you in studio with me today. I got a lot of very positive feedback about the last show that we did together.
It was a lot of fun. Yeah,
okay, it was great having you there. So today we have a bit of a heavier topic dealing with this whole issue of sexual abuse. Yeah. But I think it's a very important topic nevertheless, because despite what we would like to think, there are many people in churches who have been affected by sexual abuse in the past.
Yeah, in all walks of life, and it seems to me, at least, Michael, we're hearing more and more about sexual abuse. All of a sudden, it just seems to be becoming more and more prevalent in society. Certainly more than what it seems it used to be, maybe even as early as 10 years ago. And I'm kind of wondering if there's places where people could go, like if there's like Canadian statistics on this type of a thing about sexual abuse and so on. Do you have any idea of the kind of statistics that are kept in Canada about this kind of thing?
Yes, the statistics that we have actually is quite frightening. Canadian statistics from the Statistics Canada in 2011 are from police-reported data that was compiled in 2009, indicated that children and youth under the age of 18 were most likely to be sexually victimized or physically assaulted by someone they knew. This happened in 85% of the incidents. And in terms of numbers, the research showed that 55,000 children and youth were victims of sexual or physical offense in 2009, with 3 out of 10 of the offenses being perpetrated by family members.
Wow.
So that's kind of frightening when you think about it, that a lot of what is happening with sexual abuse is happening with someone that the victim knows, and in a lot of cases with family members.
Yeah, which gets back to what we had talked about before, about this whole thing about trust issues and so on. And what about some of the effects that you see, in someone that's been a victim of abuse? Can you maybe elaborate on some of those kinds of things?
Yeah, there are several effects. There are both short-term and long-term effects. Some of the short-term effects that we see in children who are going through sexual abuse is things like bedwetting, increased anxiety, even things like irritability, failing grades. A child who is doing well in school suddenly starts failing or starts doing very badly. These are some of the short-term effects that we see from sexual abuse. But if you look at the long-term effects, many survivors of sexual abuse suffer from things like dissociation. And some of you out there might not be familiar with the term dissociation, but what it is, it's a coping mechanism whereby the person can actually dissociate from the present reality and goes into a kind of what we call daydream, what is commonly called a daydream state. So in other words, while they were going through the abuse, this daydream state was a way that they coped with the pain, the emotional and physical pain of the sexual abuse.
A way to escape from that.
That's a very good way of putting it, Rick. It's a way of escaping from the abuse. But what we find, though, is that even in adulthood, some people who have gone through sexual abuse still dissociate when they try to talk about the incident. I have clients who I have seen where they will start going into talking about what happened to them, and then they will go into a daze as if they forget where they are and lose total touch of their surroundings. So dissociation, flashbacks. Many survivors of sexual abuse have flashbacks that permeates their memory and are intrusive. That comes up from time to time.
Wow. Well, I know in your Kingdom Life workshops you use the story of Tamar. You know, the account of Tamar being raped by her brother. That's in 2 Samuel chapter 13, and you talk about some of the common elements there. There's 3 common elements of sexual abuse. Can you elaborate on that a little bit for us and talk about what those 3 common elements would be?
Right. The story of Tamar in the book of 2 Samuel 13, 2 to 19, I think it's a very good background, a biblical background on which to base this whole discussion, because we find some common elements there that can be found in almost all cases of sexual abuse. One of the first thing that we see, the first thing is that we have a cunning perpetrator. Where a person is doing the act, but they're doing it in a way that to the victim and to those around, it may seem innocent. So if you look at the story of Tamar and the rape of Tamar by her brother Amnon, what we found in that story is that Amnon pretended to be sick.
That's right.
And he asked his father, King David, to have his half-sister Tamar bake him cake to come and to take the cake into his bedroom. Yeah. So there is the pretense of being sick, because he wasn't actually sick, but he came up with this plot as in collaboration with his advisor Jonadab, and lured Tamar into his bedroom as a way to sexually abuse her. So we have the common perpetrator, and then secondly we have unaware parents or parent. We see this in King David, where David is given permission for Tamar to take the cake to Amnon's room, and totally oblivious to the fact that there was something going. There was this scheme that is going on. And if you think about it, Rick, there could be some suspicion there, because the way that Amnon worded it is that I want Tamar especially to do this for me, no one else, just Tamar. So as a parent who is intuitive, you might wonder, okay, he's sick and he needs bread. Why does it have to be Tamar?
Yeah, why just her?
Why just her? Why couldn't it be someone else? So we have a cunning perpetrator, we have unaware parents, but we have also the outcome results in emotionally wounded victim.
Yeah.
So if you notice what Tamar said at the end, after she was assaulted, she said, "Where could I ever show my face again?" So we have a young woman who has been emotionally scarred and feeling shame, even though she has done nothing wrong. So we often see, we see these 3 components in most cases of rape: the cunning perpetrator, the unaware parents, and the emotionally wounded victim. Going back to the parents, I think it's a very interesting principle there, where we see parents who should know but somehow claimed that they didn't know.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for us to talk about that a little. So if you put yourself in the shoe of King David, and you're seeing this son coming to you and saying, I want... Remember that Amnon had many servants that could have provided this favor for him. He was the king's son. Mm-hmm. But he specifically said, I want my half-sister Tamar to do this for me. Mm-hmm. Now, that in itself might be unsuspicious to some, to if it was just this isolated incident. But what we find in everyday cases is that there are events after events like this, where parents do not clue in, or the parent that is not involved in the abuse doesn't cue in to say there is something very very fishy going on here, and we need to find out what it is.
Yeah, interesting. So, to people that are listening to the show today, and who may be suffering from the effects of sexual abuse, what would advice, or what would you say to them, giving them some tips or so on, some ideas, what would you suggest to them to sort of help them, along this path to, recovering from this kind of thing that's happened in their life?
Right. So I think one of the first thing I would say is to get help. I find that a lot of times with sexual abuse, because of the shame associated with it, many believers and non-believers who have gone through sexual abuse keeps it as a kind of a secret. No one knows. And I've seen clients who have done years of therapy with other therapists and never brings up the fact that they were abused. So there is this shame. So the first thing I would say is get professional help. The second thing I would say is be as transparent as possible about what happened and who was involved. Sometimes there is this denial that it could be a beloved family member that would perpetrate that act against the abused. And so it's as if the mind shuts down, where they find powerless, they feel powerless to name the person who did it, because to name that person would be to give up of the idealized version that they have in their mind of that person. To say it was my dad who abused me, it's a very heavy thing to be able to say. But nevertheless, to get through that abuse and to work through it, the person has to be transparent as possible. And the other thing that I would say to listeners out there, if you have been through sexual abuse, is that it's very important to realize that it's not your fault.
Important,
Very, very important to realize that.
I mean, especially if you look at this account with Tamar. I mean, she just... innocent young girl, and she said the no word, and and he just overcame her by his strength, and at the end of it all, she left, and it was like she was in mourning, and that whole thing went through that whole process,
So it's crucially important to cross that bridge of self-blame. And to come out on the other side of the bridge and go, you know what, it's not my fault, because there are so many victims who are stuck. Women who have been through what Tamar has been through blames themselves, saying, I should have seen this coming. He asked me for bread, but hindsight is always 20/20 vision, right? You're always looking back, you can say. So it's important to realize it's not your fault, and that nothing that you do could deserve someone sexually abusing you. I see survivors of sexual abuse who it happened when they were 5 years old or 8 years old, and they still have this guilt that they were somehow responsible.
Imagine carrying that around all those years.
Absolutely.
Amazing.
Absolutely. But I think it's a trick of the enemy, the devil, as we call it in Christian circles, where people take on this guilt and they start saying, somehow I must have done something to deserve what was done for me, to me.
Yeah. I'm thinking about young children. You were saying like someone carrying something from the age of 5 through. I mean, why is it always so very confusing for young children, this kind of thing?
There are a number of factors, Rick. I think one of the first factors that make it very confusing for young children is that they don't have the understanding of what sex is all about. They're very naive and very innocent where this matter of sex is concerned, and so they're lured by an abuser into doing sexual acts or into sexual touching, and so they become confused. They sometimes confuse that with love, because abusers sometimes groom the child and let the child feel we have something special. It's because I love you. You are special other than your other siblings, are special than everyone else, and so we have this special game that we play. But at the same time, there's something within the child that is saying this doesn't feel right.
Yeah.
This is somewhere wrong. Then there's also the pain that is associated.
So even at a young age, they inside, they intuitively, I guess, they understand there's just something not right about this.
Yeah, they understand that there's something not right. And I like the word that you use, intuitively, because children are so aware that they can tell the difference between a parent who is changing, like maybe a diaper and doing it out of care compared to a parent who is doing it to get sexual gratification.
Wow.
They know the difference. And some people can have memories of, mom was giving me that bath and it just didn't feel right. Even at a very young age, children are somehow able intuitively to know when that line is crossed.
So they get these confusing signals. They get these mixed signals, and that starts to cause all this confusion.
Very much so. And then another reason why it becomes very confusing for children is that they have not yet developed their sexual identity as to who they are as a person and the role that they will play sexually. So when you have a parent or someone in authority perpetrating this act, it's very confusing, because in what context then in the future is sexual activity okay?
Right.
So there can be this confusion where a person can go anywhere from one extreme of thinking that sex is just bad and this evil thing that should not be ever be done again.
Right.
To the other extreme where they could become promiscuous.
Yes.
Because I am when it comes to sex, I am powerless, and I go into this powerless state where I can say no to others who approach me. And that can be very, very devastating. If you're just joining us, you're listening to the Life Transformation radio broadcast, and I am your host, Michael Hart, and with me in studio today is Rick Lecuyer, and we are discussing this topic of sexual abuse, and we are discussing this topic using the biblical example from 2 Samuel 13, verse 2 to 19, the rape of Tamar, and we have been talking about some of the parallels from that passage in 2 Samuel, and the parallel between that incident and what happened in homes today. And the three parallels that we say in most cases of sexual abuse, there is a cunning perpetrator, there is an unaware parent or parents or unaware caregivers, and then thirdly we said there is the emotionally wounded victim. And I'd just like to read a little bit more from this story of Tamar in 2 Samuel 13, because it's very telling the shame that she felt. And I'll just read from a little bit. Let us read from 16. It's no sooner had Amnon, verse 15, no sooner had Amnon raped her that he hated her an immense hatred. The hatred that he felt for her was greater than the love he'd had for her. Get up, he said, and get out. Oh no, my brother, she said. Please, this is an even worse evil than what you just did to me. But he wouldn't listen to her. Get rid of this woman, get out of my sight, and lock the door after her. That's what he said to his servants. And then a little way down it said, she was wearing a long-sleeved gown. That's how virgin princesses used to be dressed from early adolescence on. Tamar poured ashes on her head. Then she ripped the long-sleeved gown, held her head in her hands, and walked away, sobbing as she went.
Yeah.
So here we have this very sad picture of this woman walking out with her gown that she wore being ripped and ashes poured on it as a symbol that I am not what I used to be.
Yeah.
And very literally, people who have gone through abuse, some oftentimes come out of it feeling that their lives have been changed forever and they are not what they used to be. The innocence that they had before can never be retained. The self and self-control that they had is ripped away, and the innocence is replaced with guilt and shame. And I think this story captures that very well.
Yeah, I mean, reading through this passage in 2 Samuel chapter 13, you see that I guess there's often a sense that, you know, the non-abusing parent or parents just don't want to know about these kinds of things and put these things away. And you know, you see where Absalom, her brother, finds out about it and tells her to keep quiet, you know, and even when David, the king, you know, the father, found out about it, he was furious, but he didn't do anything about it. It says that she just continued to live her life as a desolate woman.
Right. So it's like an elephant in the room that no one is really talking about.
Nobody wants to talk about, you know, and so on. So, I mean, you know, what are some of the factors behind this? You know, this reluctance that we see to stop abuse or to confront the elephant in the room. What are some of the factors that you need to sort of the steps that you take? You know,
I think a big factor in that, Rick, is denial. Like if the non-abusing parent were to admit that this is actually taking place in my family, but what does it say about the family first of all? Maybe this idealized version of this Christian family or this loving family that lives on biblical principle, that version is going to be shattered. But that is a version that we want to hold to. So this could not be happening, no, not in our family where we have devotions every day. It has to be somewhere else. So the parent who is reluctant to deal with that might just be burying his or her head in the sand and reluctant to, because it would mean the version of my family will have to change. But it also could mean that the image that the person has of themselves would have to change. Because if I'm this good parent who raised Christian kids and who is a good mother or a good father, then suddenly something like this happens in my household. Maybe I begin to ask the question, just how good a parent am I? What have I done wrong?
Yes.
That this is happening in my household. So harsh realities like those can sometimes stand in the way of persons acknowledging. So people go into denial. Then there are also the very practical sides as well. If I am to come out and confront my husband or my wife, then what does this mean for our family financially?
Yeah.
Right? The family is going to be most likely broken up.
Yeah.
And if a wife is dependent on the husband for financial support, this very harsh reality of this being her husband being taken out of the house can sometimes keep the wife's head buried in the sand and reluctant to look at what's really going on. So it just
keeps rolling along, and the elephant's always there, and you know, and it must be just so difficult. So for parents that have young children in the house,
right?
I mean, you know, that maybe going through this you know, this sexual abuse. What are some of the red flags? Like some of the things that they can look for, you know, and key in on and go, hey, look, something is definitely wrong here. I need to. You know, I recognize this now. What are the things I need to do about this? You know?
Yes, it's a very good question, Rick, because a lot of times parents who have gone through this come out on the other side saying, I should have seen it happening. How could I have missed it?
Yeah.
And so some of the signs that could be helpful or could be an indication, let me preface this by saying that this doesn't mean that it's absolutely happening, but there could be warning flags that it might be going on. If you have a situation where your spouse is isolating one child and spending a lot of time with one child in private behind locked doors for whatever reason that they say, this might be a sign. If a child is being isolated, could be a sign. If a child is being treated in a way that is different than how the other siblings are treated, given special privileges, told that they're special, and given favors that other children in the household does not get. This could be a sign that the child has been groomed by the abusing parent. Also, if you see a display of affection where your partner wants to show affection to the child, even when the child is reluctant to get a hug or to be cuddled, and they are being forced to do that in your presence, it might mean that there could be something else going on. If your spouse, or if you feel that the child is somehow being exposed to sexual materials under the guise of sexual education, and you feel it is way too premature for that to be happening, then that could be a sign. If a parent is playing a role that the opposite sex parent should be playing, then this also might be a sign. Like, for example, a dad who might want to talk to his daughter about menstrual cycles.
Wow,
that should be the wife's job. So these sometimes can be red flag. Any kind of touching under the guise of examining for whatever reason a girl who is going through puberty. Sometimes we have abusive dad who would do things like touch the girl's breast to see if it's developing properly or if they're feeling any pain. Those kind of things. That should be a big red flag, I would say. So unfortunately, our time for today has gone by rather quickly, more quickly than we anticipated, Rick, and we have come to the end of today's show. But I just want to thank you for being with us here today and for helping us to unravel this topic and to discuss it, especially in the light of 2 Samuel, and to look at the comparisons between that story and today's story. So if you're listening to this show today and you have gone through sexual abuse, or you are going through sexual abuse, I would like you to know that you can get help. You should begin to speak to others about it, and to begin to reach out for help. Professional help might be needed to help you to find the courage to talk about what you are going through. And I would say at Elam, we're very equipped to help with that area. So you can reach us at 613-699-1677, 613-699-1677. Again, Rick, thank you very much for being us here today, and look forward to doing it again sometime with
Always
you.
a pleasure, Michael. Thank you.
Thank you. So you have been listening to Life Transformation Radio Broadcast, and we have come to the end of today's show. But until next time, this is your host, Michael Hart, praying that God would grant you happiness in all your relationships and keep you sound in mind and pure in heart. God bless you.